Hey guys, tonight we're going way back. Into a world where crowns were heavy not just with jewels, but with judgment. You're stepping into the shoes, or let's be honest, probably the mud-caked boots, of kings who dared to look the church straight in the eye and say, no. Spoiler. It rarely ended well. This is a story about power, and about what happens when divine authority and earthly ambition have to share a very small room with very big egos. There's going to be snow scrolls, dead queens, papal tantrums, and the occasional royal meltdown. But don't worry. Nothing too scary. Just a slow, burn kind of drama that's perfect for drifting off to sleep while learning about people who probably didn't get much themselves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing how global this sleepy little club has become. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a cold stone corridor that smells faintly of incense and political ambition. Behind you, a red tapestry ripples in the draft. Ahead, a wooden door creaks open. A courtier bows and whispers. His Majesty awaits the Pope's answer. And just like that, you're in medieval Europe, where the king is king, but only as long as the church says so. The idea of divine right sounds glamorous on paper. God picks a king, the king rules, everyone obeys. Simple, right? Except there's a catch. That divine right, the church holds the receipt. And popes? Well, popes like to read the fine print. You realize very quickly that monarchs live in a strange tension. On one hand, they've got armies, taxes, castles, and egos the size of cathedrals. On the other, there's a man in Rome who claims authority over their soul. A man who doesn't even wear armor, but somehow wields excommunication like a sword sharper than any steel. You take a seat in a great hall where courtiers mutter about the Pope's latest decree. It seems a bishop has been appointed without royal approval. The king clenches his goblet. The wine sloshes slightly. You feel the tension like a string about to snap. This isn't new. In fact, this tug of war has been going on for centuries. The church claims spiritual supremacy. Kings, well, they like being in charge of everything, including the bishops who collect taxes for them. And the people. They mostly want their bread warm and their heads attached. A chronicler nearby is scribbling something about investiture. You peek over his shoulder. It's the 11th century's favorite argument: who gets to appoint bishops, the Pope or the king. You can almost hear the historians sighing through the ages. Still unresolved. They mutter, dipping their pens again. The weirdest part. Sometimes the church wins. Not just in heaven, but here on muddy, plague-sprinkled earth. Popes have sent kings crawling through snow, waiting outside castles for forgiveness. Some kings cried. Some didn't. But most eventually knocked. It's kind of like when you're a teenager and think you've outgrown your parents, and then realize they still hold the Wi-Fi password. That's the Pope, essentially the medieval Wi-Fi gatekeeper. But this chapter isn't about a single event. It's about the pattern you start to notice as you move through dimly lit chapels and echoing throne rooms. Kings want freedom, popes want order, and neither side really wants to blink first. You overhear someone mention Henry IV. That name will come up again and again. But for now, it's just a reminder. This power struggle isn't about good versus evil. It's more like stubborn versus stubborn. You pull your cloak tighter. A storm's brewing, both outside and in the realm of divine politics. You're going to meet kings who stand tall, popes who slam doors, and kingdoms caught in the middle like a very expensive sandwich. But for now, you rest in this corridor of power. The fire crackles softly. The whisper of monks chanting in a nearby chapel hums through the stone walls. You let it lull you, knowing this is just the beginning. You're waking up stiff and cold in a mountain town called Canossa. The year is 1077, and your feet are frozen, literally, because you've been standing barefoot in the snow for 3 days straight, hoping a man behind a locked door will finally let you in. You are Henry IV, Holy Roman Emperor. But right now, the title feels theoretical. Behind the castle gates, Pope Gregory VI is enjoying a warm fire and possibly some roasted chestnuts. He knows you're out here. Everyone knows you're out here. That's kind of the point. This is a political drama performed at sub-zero temperatures. So, how did we get here? Well, you had this idea. As emperor, you figured you could appoint bishops without asking Rome. After all, they were in your empire, collecting your taxes, marching with your armies. It seemed reasonable at the time. The Pope disagreed. In writing, Gregory sent you a little note. Well, more like a divine smackdown. telling you that only the church had the authority to appoint bishops, and if you didn't back down, you'd be excommunicated. Which you were. And you, in a rare burst of royal panic, wrote him a letter back, calling him not a real pope. Bold move. And here's where things got frosty. Literally, because once you're excommunicated, it's not just a spiritual issue. Suddenly, your nobles smell weakness. They whisper in corridors. Some of them switch sides. Others just stop answering your calls. You need to get back in the Pope's good graces or risk losing everything, including your lovely title. So here you are, in the snow, outside Canossa Castle, wearing a simple wool shirt and humility like a second skin. And what does Gregory do? He makes you wait 3 days. Historians still debate why. Was he making a point? Was it just a scheduling conflict? Was he waiting for the right lighting for this cinematic showdown? Nobody knows. But eventually, on the 3rd day, the doors creak open. You kneel, he lifts the excommunication. Technically, you're back in. Spiritually rebooted. Politically recharged. But the damage is done. From this moment on, your authority is never quite the same. Your nobles have seen you beg. The church has flexed. And the people, well, they've got a new bedtime story about an emperor who had to wait in the snow for forgiveness. What's wild is that this moment, dramatic as it is, didn't actually solve the bigger issue. The question of who gets to appoint bishops. Still up for debate. The investiture controversy would drag on for decades, through multiple popes, emperors, and awkward church-state dinners, and Canossa became a symbol. Even today, going to Canossa means humbling yourself to someone you've offended. Though ideally in better footwear, you warm your toes near a small brazier as the castle courtyard empties. The snow continues to soft and silent, erasing footprints and egos alike. And while you may be back in the church, part of you knows you'll never walk quite the same again. You're now in England. The air smells like damp parchment and roasted pheasant. Candles flicker along the long table of a stone hall where King John, yes, that King John, is having a very bad day, you know John. Not from history books, maybe, but from that grumpy, crown-wearing cartoon lion in Robin Hood. Spoilered, the real version wasn't much cuddlier. It's Homo 9 and things have escalated fast. Earlier, you watched as John argued with Pope Innocent II about who should be Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope wanted one guy, John wanted another. So naturally, John refused to accept the Pope's choice. The Pope responded by placing all of England under interdict, which sounds fancy but basically means no church services, no weddings, no funerals, no sacraments. For the average peasant, this is terrifying. If you die, who's going to bury you properly? What about baptizing your baby? What if the chicken dies unblessed? And John, well, he took it well, at first. Confiscated some church lands. Threw out some monks. Typical Tuesday. But then came the excommunication. And suddenly, you're watching a king pace a drafty corridor, realizing that excommunication doesn't just hurt your soul, it hurts your politics. The barons grow restless. Foreign enemies sniff opportunity. Everyone's a little less afraid of a king that even God seems annoyed with. Now, here's where things get weird. To fix the situation, John, this famously stubborn king, does something few rulers have ever dared. He surrenders his kingdom. No, really. In 1213, you stand beside him as he kneels before a papal legate, places his crown on the ground, and offers England as a fief to the Pope. He literally becomes the Pope's vassal. It's one of the most bizarre political maneuvers in medieval Europe. Suddenly, England is part of the Papal States, in theory. John gets his crown back, eventually. The interdict is lifted, and the Pope now technically owns England, which he leases back to John for 1,000 marks a year. You can hear the barons sharpening their swords from here. Historians still debate whether this move was genius or desperation. Did John buy himself protection from Rome and from invasion? Or did he just sell out his entire country to cover a political mess? Whatever the case, it didn't make him popular. 2 years later, he was forced to sign the Magna Carta. You know, that legendary document that limited royal power and basically planted the seeds of constitutional law. And while most people focus on the barons and the taxes and the forests, you now realize that it all kind of started with a fight over an archbishop. The echoes of that battle still rumble today. The question of where church ends and state begins. Still fuzzy, still political, still the subject of long conferences and late-night debates. You pull your cloak tighter as the English wind howls outside. A servant brings in warm cider. King John mumbles something bitter about Rome under his breath. And somewhere, Pope Innocent is smiling. He now owns a kingdom he'll never visit. You step off the dusty road into the heart of Ethiopia. It's the 1600s now, and the highlands shimmer in golden afternoon light. Thick stone churches rise out of the ground like ancient secrets, and robed priests chant softly beneath painted ceilings. You're in the kingdom of Gundar, once the cultural and spiritual heart of an empire that has its own Christianity, its own script, its own rhythm of time. And into this world walks a Jesuit. Actually, quite a few Jesuits. European missionaries, pale and determined, fresh off months of sea voyages and camel rides, arrive with one goal: to convert Ethiopia's ancient Orthodox Church to Roman Catholicism. Why? Because they believe they're bringing the true version of the faith, and because European monarchs, especially Portugal's, have long viewed Ethiopia as a mysterious Christian ally trapped in an Islamic sea. You're standing beside Emperor Susnio's Eye, a tall, thoughtful man with the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders and a newfound fascination with European books. He listens to the Jesuits. He's intrigued by their stories, their maps, their clocks. Eventually, he makes a decision that will echo across the mountains he converts. Just like that, Ethiopia has a Catholic emperor, but his people, not so much. You travel with Susnios as he tries to persuade his court. There are proclamations, ceremonies, even a few imported European priests with shiny robes and Latin chants. But the Ethiopians resist, fiercely. They don't want Rome's version of Christianity. They have their own saints, their own fasting rules, their own way of facing Jerusalem. One day, you overhear monks chanting about King Azana and ancient battles. Another day, you see villagers hiding their icons and sacred books. Rebellions begin. Small at first, rumors in the hills scattered violence. Then bigger. Susnios tries to keep control, but it's like herding incense smoke. The country erupts in civil unrest. Monasteries rebel. Nobles plot. The very identity of Ethiopian Christianity is under siege. And here's the tragic twist: Susnios wasn't trying to destroy his people's faith. He believed he was enriching it. He thought he was bringing unity. Instead, he brought chaos. Finally, in 1632, standing on a wind-blown ridge overlooking the burning remnants of yet another uprising, he gives up. He steps down, hands the crown to his son, and Ethiopia reverts to orthodoxy. Catholicism never really takes root again. The Jesuits pack their books and slip away, leaving behind a trail of painted ceilings, confused converts, and one of the most remarkable religious detours in African history. Historians still debate how close Ethiopia came to fully embracing Catholicism. Some argue that if Susnios had held on a little longer, history might have turned. Others think it was doomed from the start, too foreign, too forceful, too fast. As you sit beside an old monk sipping thick, dark coffee, you realize something. Power and faith don't always mix well. And when kings try to rewrite belief from the top down, they often forget that faith grows best from the roots. The sun sets behind the highlands, casting long shadows over stone crosses and forgotten letters from Rome. You breathe in the incense, lace dusk, and wonder how many other empires tried to swap gods and learn the hard way. People rarely follow quietly. You wake up in Avignon, France, or rather what should be France but for the moment is basically Vatican City 1.0. It's the early 1300s, and instead of ruling from Rome, the Pope has set up shop in this cozy riverside town. And by set up shop, we mean he's brought the entire papal court, a small fortune in taxes, and enough bureaucracy to clog a medieval sewer. You stretch your legs and try to figure out why exactly you're here. It all started with a little tension between Pope Boniface VI and King Philip IV of France. Philip had this idea that maybe, just maybe, he should be allowed to tax the clergy in his realm. To pay for wars, parties, a strong central government, the usual royal expenses. The Pope naturally said none, or more accurately, no, but in Latin and with lots of scrolls involved. So Philip sent troops to negotiate with the Pope. That went about as well as you'd expect. Boniface was captured, slapped around, and died shortly after. And while historians still argue about whether it was the trauma or just medieval health care that did him in, the message was clear: kings were getting bolder. Flash forward a few years, and now you're hanging around Pope Clement V, who's been elected largely because he's, well, convenient. French, politically agreeable, and not too fussy about the whole independence of the church thing. Instead of moving to Rome, Clement stays in Avignon. Why? Several reasons. Rome at the time is a mess. Think armed gangs, collapsing aqueducts, and political chaos that makes modern city councils look tidy. Avignon, by contrast, has wine, good plumbing, and the quiet approval of the French crown. You walk past papal accountants tolling indulgences, clerks drafting bulls, and bishops enjoying fig tarts. This isn't a holy exile, it's a bureaucratic renaissance. And so begins the Avignon papacy, nearly 70 years of popes living not in Rome, but in a perfectly nice corner of southern France. The French kings love it. It's like having the church in your backyard. Convenient, compliant, and easy to influence. For many people, though it feels off, popes aren't supposed to be French nobles living in wine country. They're supposed to be in Rome, under divine guidance, not French sunlight. Eventually, in 1377, Pope Gregory tries to fix things. He hauls the court back to Rome, possibly against his better judgment, and when he dies shortly after, all papal diplomacy collapses like a poorly built altar. What follows is one of the strangest chapters in church history. The Great Western Schism. You watch wide-eyed as 2 popes get elected, then 3. Then, no kidding, Europe literally splits its religious loyalty depending on the politics of the day. Some kings back Rome, others Avignon. A few just throw up their hands and pay tithes to both, hoping for a heavenly refund later. Historians still debate how much the Avignon years hurt the papacy's moral authority. Some say it exposed the political side of the church too clearly. Others argue it was just another example of how religion has always lived alongside power, compromise, and a good vintage. You sip a glass of local red wine as a bishop walks by, muttering about a shortage of goose quills. Somewhere in the distance, the Rokuni River flows steadily, oblivious to the theological drama playing out on its banks. And you think, maybe Rome isn't always a place. Sometimes it's just wherever the Pope keeps his hats. You're squinting up at the jagged peaks of Bohemia, modern-day Czech Republic, where the wind bites, the forests whisper, and the bonfires burn a little too brightly for comfort. It's the early 400s, and the man you're following is Jan Hus. Tall, sharp-eyed, and perpetually stressed, Hus is one of those people who didn't exactly plan to start a religious revolution. He just wanted the church to be less corrupt, less rich, less indulgence selling. But as you quickly learn, questioning the church during this time is like poking a beehive with a flaming sword. It starts innocently enough. Hus, a university preacher in Prague, starts giving sermons in Czech instead of Latin. Radical. He talks about how the church should serve the people, not the other way around. He praises the English reformer John Wycliffe, who was already causing papal headaches across the channel. And then he really crosses the line. He questions the Pope's moral authority during the Great Western Schism. You're there as students cheer him in the lecture halls and nobles nod approvingly, but church officials, not fans. Before long, Hus is excommunicated, but the king of Bohemia kind of likes him, and so does much of the Czech population. So Hus keeps preaching, teaching, and writing. You can practically feel the tension in the air thickening like soup left on the fire too long. In 1414, Hus gets an invitation. Come to the Council of Constance and explain yourself. A chance to clear his name, they say. And the Holy Roman Emperor gives him a safe conduct pass. You know, like a medieval VIP badge, you travel with Hus through the snow and into Constance, watching him clutch his papers and rehearse his arguments. He's hopeful, nervous, maybe a little too trusting. Because when you arrive, the pass means nothing. He's arrested, thrown into a cell, tried for heresy. The trial is more like theater than justice. The church wants submission, not debate. Hus refuses to recon unless they can show him he's wrong. A bold move and a dangerous one. On July 6, 1415, you're standing in the crowd as Hus is led to the stake. He refuses a final confession. He prays, and then he burns, quietly, without screaming. Which, given the context, is deeply unsettling. And that should be the end of it. But it isn't. Back in Bohemia, his death ignites something bigger. A full-scale uprising. The Hussite Wars begin. A tangle of religious rebellion, national identity, and very angry peasants with flails. For the first time in Europe, a Christian group breaks away from Rome and stays broken. The seeds of Protestantism are already in the soil, decades before Martin Luther nails anything to any door. Historians still argue about Hus's legacy. Was he a martyr for truth, a proto-reformer, or just a man who underestimated how much fire the church was willing to throw? You're not sure. But as you walk the stone streets of Constance at night, the scent of smoke still lingers. And the question echoes softly in the cold air. What's the cost of asking too many questions? You blink against the desert sun of Al-Andalus, where orange trees bloom in courtyards and calligraphy flows like water on mosque walls. It's the 11th century, and you're in what is now southern Spain. But back then, it's a dazzling crossroads of religion, philosophy, and occasionally flaming books. This is Islamic Iberia, and you're walking the shaded halls of Cordoba, once the jewel of Europe. The streets are clean. The libraries are vast. The medical texts are better than anything you've seen in Paris or Rome. But despite the relative peace, tensions simmer beneath the tiles. The Christian Reconquista is creeping south, and amidst this shifting tide, one philosopher stands out: Averroes. Or, if you're reading his passport, Ibn Rushd. You're introduced to him one evening in a courtyard lit with oil lamps. He's calm, curious, and the kind of person who would definitely lose track of time in a debate. His big idea. That reason and religion. Yes, reason coexist. He reads Aristotle like it's a sacred text, and he argues that faith doesn't have to fear logic. To you, it sounds sensible. But in 12th century religious politics, it's a little too spicy. You sit beside him as he writes his commentaries, dense works that'll one day shape European philosophy during the Renaissance. But right now he's controversial. The Almohad dynasty, who rule much of the region, are getting more conservative, less tolerant, less interested in blending Greek philosophy with the Koran. One afternoon, you overhear a court official muttering about heresy. A few weeks later, the books are confiscated. Averroes is exiled. For a time he lives in relative obscurity. You find him near Cordoba, still scribbling notes, still arguing that logic is not the enemy of belief. He doesn't start riots. He doesn't burn churches. He just writes, questions, thinks. Eventually, the ban is lifted, partially. He's allowed back just before his death. Not exactly a triumphant return, but enough for his legacy to quietly take root. And here's the twist: while the Muslim world cools on Averroes, Europe picks him up like a philosophical hand, me down. Latin translations his work spread across Italy, France, and beyond. Thomas Aquinas argues him gently on paper. Renaissance thinkers build on his ideas. Historians still debate just how much influence Averroes had. Some call him the father of secular thought. Others see him as a bridge, frail, elegant, between ancient Greece and modern reason. As you sit beneath the arches of the great mosque, now half converted into a cathedral, you realize something about heretics. They don't always shout. Some whisper so clearly that the echo lasts for centuries. The wind moves through the orange trees. Somewhere, a muezzin calls the faithful to prayer. And you wonder, what if more empires had made room for both belief and thought? You're trudging through the muddy back roads of England, your boots sinking with every step. The year is 1534, and you're trying to make it to London before yet another royal decree changes everything again. Because this, dear listener, is the year Henry V decided to break up with the Pope, publicly, with paperwork. It starts, as many things in Henry's life do, with a woman. Or two. You already know the basics. Henry wants a male heir. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, hasn't delivered one. He's already eyeing Anne Boleyn, who is smart, charming, and very much not his wife. The Pope, not impressed by Henry's request for an annulment. Politically complicated, morally murky. And besides, Catherine is the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor. This is not just marriage drama, it's international diplomacy with tiaras. So what does Henry do? Well, first, he throws a bit of a royal tantrum. Then, in classic over-the-top style, he creates an entirely new church just so he can marry someone else. You're in the court as the act of supremacy is declared. Parliament, probably exhausted by the king's obsession with wedding logistics, passes it. Boom, Henry is now the supreme head of the Church of England. He can annul his own marriages. He can oversee doctrine. And, crucially, he no longer has to send taxes or loyalty to Rome. For a while, it feels like a pageant. Clergy switch allegiances. Royal officials scribble new oaths. You overhear bishops grumbling over breakfast about adjusting to the new branding. But this isn't just church drama. It's cultural upheaval. Monasteries across the country are dissolved, some peacefully, others under the firm encouragement of royal troops. Lands are seized, gold is melted, statues disappear. Ordinary folks, like the guy selling pears at the market, start whispering that maybe this isn't just about Anne Boleyn. And speaking of Anne, well, she's queen for a while. You pass her in the palace gardens, walking with that characteristic Boleyn confidence. She's witty, sharp-tongued, and fully aware she's walking a tightrope. Then, less than 3 years later, you're watching her execution. A single sword stroke. Henry's moved on, to Jane Seymour. You sit by the Thames one evening and try to make sense of it all. Was Henry's break from Rome about love? Power, ego? All of the above. Historians still argue. Some say it opened the door to Protestant reforms and modern national churches. Others say it was just one man's personal crisis turned national disaster. But you can't deny the ripples. England would never be the same. The Pope's word, once unchallengeable, now had competition. And ordinary people had to decide it. Is the king's conscience enough to reshape a faith? The bells of London ring in the distance. A street preacher starts a sermon, and you, watching from the shadows, can't help but think, is reform still reform if it starts with Romans? You're threading your way through the incense-filled streets of Kyoto, and everything smells like cedarwood, rain-soaked stone, and roasted chestnuts. It's the late 1500s, And Japan is trying to figure out if it wants Christianity, firearms, or just a break from all these Portuguese visitors. You're here to meet a man whose name means thunder. Jitomo Estarin, a daimyo or regional lord who did something truly shocking. He converted to Christianity. Publicly, with gusto, crosses, rosaries, European robes, the full transformation. It's a strange sight. You visit his stronghold in Kyushu, where Japanese swords hang next to crucifixes. Monks chant in Latin while samurai spar in the courtyard. It's a cultural smoothie, and somehow it's working. For now, Tomo Estarin isn't alone. Christianity's been trickling into Japan thanks to Jesuit missionaries like Francis Xavier. To you it looks like a quiet invasion of ideas, churches springing up in coastal towns, local lords flirting with baptism, and Japanese children named Paulo and Maria. But it's not just about faith. Christianity offers alliances, trade perks, and firearms. Oh yes, the muskets are very popular. You attend a mass in a makeshift church. Rice paper walls, tatami mats, and a European-style altar that looks slightly confused about its surroundings. Converts kneel beside nobles. A Buddhist monk passes by outside, pretending not to notice. Estarin believes this is the future. He funds missionaries, bans Buddhism in his territory, and even sends an embassy of Japanese boys to meet the Pope in Rome. Imagine the jet lag. It's an accept by ship, but not everyone's thrilled. You hear murmurs from other daimyos. The shogunate is skeptical. The emperor is politely disinterested. And soon there's backlash. Buddhist temples strike back politically. Other lords accuse Christians of undermining Japanese identity. And when Toyotomi Hideyoshi comes to power, the temperature shifts from mild suspicion to absolute nope. In 1587, Christianity is officially banned. Missionaries are expelled. Estarin, now old and sick, watches as the faith he helped plant begins to wither. He dies shortly after, his territory weakened, his legacy already under erasure. You return decades later and find the persecution has gotten worse. Christians in hiding. Secret gatherings. Crosses disguised as Buddhist statues. Historians still debate whether Estarin's motives were spiritual or strategic. Was he a genuine believer, a savvy politician, or both? What's clear is this: for a moment, a powerful man bet everything on a foreign faith. And for a few years, it almost worked. You look up at the wooden beams of a hidden chapel. Someone's carved a cross in the ceiling. It's faint, weathered by time, but still there. And you think sometimes heresy isn't loud. It's carved in secret, left for the next brave soul to find. You're high in the Andes now, lungs pulling thin mountain air, and the horizon is a watercolor of mist and stone terraces. The year is 1532, and you've just stepped into the glittering heart of the Inca Empire. Cuzco. You're right on time for one of the most lopsided, tragic, and baffling encounters in history. Because here comes Francisco Pizarro with fewer than 200 men, a handful of horses, and a flag that says, Spain. And over here, the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, commanding tens of thousands and dressed in enough gold to start a minor economic crisis in Europe. It should have been a diplomatic visit. Instead, it becomes one of the most infamous hello scenes ever. But before we get to that moment, you've got to understand the Inca view. Atahualpa has just won a brutal civil war against his brother Huáscar. The empire is huge but fractured. The timing, impeccably bad. You travel with messengers through mountain passes. Chasquis, they're called. Runners who relay news faster than you'd think possible. And the news is weird. Bearded men on animals that look like demons, shiny armor, thundersticks that shoot fire. They want a meeting. Atahualpa, confident to the point of cosmic irony, agrees. You're in Cajamarca, a town surrounded by cold stone walls and nervous silence. The emperor arrives with his retinue. Unarmed, curious, and cloaked in divinity. He's treated like a god. After all, in Inca cosmology, he pretty much is. And then the Spanish hand him a Bible. It's a symbolic moment. The priest explains the word of God. Atahualpa listens, opens the book. Nothing happens. He tosses it aside. To the Spanish, that's heresy, disrespect, war. The ambush is sudden and brutal. Horses charge. Guns fire. The Inca royal guards, mostly ceremonial, are massacred. Atahualpa is captured. No one can quite believe it. You're standing in the plaza, stunned. The empire. This massive, sophisticated network of roads, agriculture, astronomy, and textile art starts unraveling with the kidnapping of one man. Atahualpa tries to negotiate. He offers a ransom room filled with gold. Literally, a room filled with gold. The Spanish accepted, and then execute him anyway. The justification: he refused Christianity. He lived like a god. He had too much influence. In other words, heresy. You ride with the Spanish deeper into the empire. Looted cities. Sacred sites turned into churches. The Inca resistance simmers but is disorganized. You start to wonder what might have happened if the civil war hadn't weakened them. If smallpox hadn't arrived first. If Atahualpa had read the Bible differently. Historians are still sorting out the mix of arrogance, misunderstanding, and ruthless strategy. Was Atahualpa a fool? Or just too trusting? Was Pizarro a tactical genius or a lucky gambler? You sit at the base of a ruined temple. A local woman walks past, humming a song that predates Columbus. Above you, the stars wheel in their Incan patterns. The gold is gone, the gods are different. But the echoes remain. Your ankle deep in sand, surrounded by the distant bleating of goats and the hum of wind across mud brick walls. It's Egypt. But not the pyramids, and Pharaoh's Egypt. You're in the 4th century AD, in Alexandria, where scrolls outnumber swords and arguments over theology are a full-contact sport. You're here for a showdown, and the stakes. Immortally complicated. Meet Arius, a Christian priest with excellent posture, a sharp tongue, and one very controversial idea that Jesus, while divine, is not equal to God the Father, that he was created, like there was a time when the sun did not exist. This might not sound earth-shattering now, but back then, oh boy, you sit in the back of a packed basilica as Arius calmly outlines his theology in verse. Yes, verse. Because this guy wrote catchy hymns to spread his beliefs. Imagine hearing, "There was a time he was not," sung like a jingle. The theological tick-tock of his day. The problem. This clashes with what many bishops believe, including a rising star named Athanasius. For them, Jesus is co-eternal with God, no exceptions. The city erupts. People aren't just debating. They're rioting. The fishmongers are quoting theology. Shopkeepers throw shade using Greek metaphysics. You pass 2 old men arguing whether begotten means created or something more mysterious. Then the Emperor Constantine steps in. He's recently made Christianity legal and doesn't want it to immediately implode. So, he calls a little get-together. The First Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. And yes, imagine a big theological Comic-Con, except the costumes are robes and the panels involve yelling in Koine Greek. Over 300 bishops show up. Arius is there defending his view, but the crowd turns. His logic is too neat, too tidy for a mystery like the Trinity, and he's up against political momentum. Constantine wants unity, and Arius isn't offering it. You watch as the Nicene Creed is hammered out. The phrasing is meticulous. Begotten, not made of one substance with the Father. That consubstance line. A dagger through Arius' entire argument. He's declared a heretic. You travel back to Alexandria, where his books are burned. His followers, called Arians, are pressured into silence. But the funny thing, Arianism doesn't die. In fact, it spreads across Europe like theological wildfire, especially among the Germanic tribes. For centuries, parts of Christendom are still split. Is Jesus truly equal? Or something slightly less? Historians point out how much of this debate was also about politics, power, and identity. Arius wasn't just pushing theology, he was challenging a fragile orthodoxy. You sit by the Nile, watching boats glide by. Somewhere, a child hums an old tune. You swear you recognize the melody. There was a time he was not. Echoes linger. You're deep in a French forest. The year is 1307 and someone's whispering about treasure. Not gold coins in a cave or jewels behind a waterfall, no. This is about secrets, power, and a mysterious group that had everything, until they didn't. Tonight you're riding with the Knights Templar. You've probably heard the name. White cloaks, red crosses, silent gazes across battlefields. Formed after the First Crusade to protect pilgrims, the Templars quickly became more than just holy warriors. They got land, castles, a lot of donations, and eventually, banks. Yanks. You find yourself in a Templar commandery that feels more like a medieval data center than a monastery. They're holding valuables for nobles, offering loans to kings, and managing real estate portfolios that would make modern tycoons sweat. And here's the problem. They've become too rich, too influential, and too independent. King Philip IV of France owes them a lot of money. Conveniently, he also suspects them of heresy. Or, well, he says he does. You're standing outside the Paris Temple at dawn, October 13, 1307. A Friday. You hear pounding on doors, clanking of swords. Simultaneous arrests across France. Hundreds of Templars. Charged with, well, it's a bit of everything. Worshipping a mysterious head. Spitting on crosses. Secret rituals. Kissing each other's feet. You're trying not to raise an eyebrow. Are these charges real? Or just really convenient? Historians still argue. Some say the confessions were made under torture. Others think maybe a few rituals got a little too weird. But either way, the show trial begins. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, is a big deal. You watch him confess, then recant, then get burned at the stake. As the flames rise, he supposedly shouts a curse, calling the king and pope to join him in death. Spoiler, both die within the year. You travel to rural chapels and lonely castles where people still whisper about hidden Templar gold. You peek into crypts. You find carved crosses in forgotten walls. Nothing definitive. But the myth lives on. Even centuries later, Freemasons, conspiracy theorists, and Hollywood all recycle the Templars. Sometimes they're guardians of the Holy Grail. Sometimes they're keepers of forbidden knowledge. Sometimes they're just very well-dressed extras in video games. You sit by a ruined outpost in southern France. The moon is up. The ground is quiet. Somewhere nearby, an old olive tree leans toward the earth like it's listening. If there's a secret, it's buried deep, probably under several layers of misfiled paperwork and legend. But in the end, you realize it. The Templars' heresy wasn't what they believed. It was who they refused to owe anything to. And kings don't like unpaid debts. You're walking barefoot across sun-warmed stones in Kyoto, 1591. The air is thick with incense and the faint smell of fresh ink. Around you, temple bells chime quietly, and monks shuffle in sandals. But you're not here for tranquility. You're here to witness the trial, and the end, of one of Japan's most unusual and defiant figures. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's Christian samurai. Yes, Christian, and yes, samurai. You rewind a few decades. In the mid-1500s, Jesuit missionaries arrive in Japan. Francis Xavier, all robes and optimism, comes ashore and begins spreading the gospel. And surprisingly, it works, not just among peasants. Daimyos, local lords, start converting, especially in the south. You attend a mass in Nagasaki. Candles flickering, Latin hymns mixing with Japanese voices. Crosses hang beside katana blades. Tea ceremonies now begin with a prayer. Samurai attend confession between battles. For a while, it's peaceful. But then comes Hideyoshi, military genius, unifier of Japan, and a man who does not like foreign influence. He sees the missionaries as a threat, a backdoor colonization, a loyalty test wrapped in scripture. And he starts to push back. You're there when he issues the edict Christianity is banned. Churches must be dismantled, missionaries expelled. Japanese converts, well, they can renounce or face consequences. Some do, but some don't. You walk with a group of 26 men and boys. Franciscan missionaries, Japanese Christians. A few teenagers barely old enough to hold a sword. They're being marched from Kyoto to Nagasaki, public spectacle, frozen roads, mockery along the way. And when they arrive, they're crucified. Literally, you stand on a hillside, wind sharp as razors. Wooden crosses loom against a bruised sky. The men sing hymns as they're tied and pierced. One boy, just 12, thanks the guards for letting him share the same fate as his teacher. It's grim, but also oddly serene. The martyrs don't break, and that's the problem. Because the ban doesn't make Christianity disappear. It just drives it underground. You spend years among the Kakurikirishiten, hidden Christians, who pretend to follow Buddhism by day but whisper Latin prayers in back rooms at night. They hide statues of the Virgin Mary as canon, the Bodhisattva of mercy. They baptize in kitchens and pass down hymns phonetically, generation after generation. Historians are still amazed at how long they survived. Nearly 250 years of persecution. No priests, no Bibles, just oral memory and stubborn hope. Eventually, Christianity returns to Japan. But those underground believers, they'd evolved into something entirely different. Not quite Catholic, not quite Buddhist, just Japanese. You sit in a quiet seaside chapel built long after the ban ended. A cracked bell from the 1600s hangs above you. It rings once, then fades in the night like a prayer with no clear destination. Faith, you realize, has always been both a torch and a hiding place. You're in a sun-drenched field outside of Master Germany, 1534. The birds are chirping, but the vibe is real, tense, because inside the city walls, a group of radical Anabaptists has declared a new kingdom. And you're trying not to look too Catholic. This is not your average Protestant Reformation story. You rewind just a bit. Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses back in 1517, kicking off a religious revolution. But not everyone who broke with the Catholic Church agreed with him. Enter the Anabaptists, believers in adult baptism, separation from the world, and occasionally communal living. At first, they're just annoying to the authorities. Then some get fiery, very fiery. You walk into Minster as it's overtaken by Jan Matthews, a charismatic preacher who claims to be the new Gideon. Think, divine warrior meets doomsday prepper. People are rebaptized in Mass. Catholic priests are expelled. Lutheran books burned. Then Matthews announces Judgment Day is imminent. You nod slowly. You've heard that one before. He doesn't last long. On Easter Sunday, he charges out of the city with a handful of followers to smite the wicked. He's immediately cut down. Literally, his head ends up on a pike. But instead of collapsing, Meester doubles down. Meet Jan Leyden, Matthews's successor. Yonder slicker, more theatrical. He proclaims himself king of the new Zion. He wears a golden crown and robes, and soon he institutes polygamy. Yes, really. You wander through the increasingly strange streets. Men take multiple wives. Dissenters are jailed or executed. Van Layden dances in the marketplace, quoting scripture. The city becomes a stage and he's its messianic actor-director. Meanwhile, outside the walls, the bishop of Nestor is not amused. A siege begins. Months pass. Starvation sets in. Inside, paranoia reigns. You sneak into a cellar where a secret group still prays the Catholic rosary, risking death if caught. Finally, in 1535, the city falls. The king is captured, tortured, and executed. But the story doesn't end there. You stand in the main square of Mneister today and look up. There, hanging from the church tower, are 3 iron cages. The same ones once held the corpses of Van Layden and his fellow leaders. As a warning, or maybe a monument to how weird and dangerous belief can get when it loses its tether. Historians still debate it. Were the Monarchs desperate utopians, twisted cultists, or just people who snapped under the pressure of a chaotic world? Whatever the answer, you now know. Heresy isn't always whispered. Sometimes it's sung, danced, and crowned, and sometimes it leaves behind a literal cage in the sky. You're tiptoeing through the corridors of Westminster Palace in 1533, and the tension is so thick you could spread it on toast. Around you, courtiers murmur, nobles glance sideways, and everyone is trying not to mention one very dangerous name: Anne Boleyn. Tonight, you're walking in the shadows of the English Reformation, not the theological bits, but the messy, romantic, heretical, and very human drama that started with a king's infatuation and ended with a church split that shook Europe. And you're smack in the middle of it. King Henry viewed as a charming, athletic monarch with a problem. His wife, Catherine of Aragon, hasn't given him a male heir. You've sat through too many dinners where the conversation awkwardly dies as the subject turns to babies. Then Anne shows up. Anne Boleyn isn't your typical Tudor lady. She's witty, politically astute, and, important, unavailable. Henry is obsessed. But Anne refuses to be just another mistress. She wants the crown. So, Henry starts looking for an exit. You find yourself buried in legal scrolls and church documents as Henry petitions the Pope for an annulment. It's complicated. Catherine is the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor, who happens to have a lot of swords. The Pope understandably stalls. And Henry, he gets impatient. He declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England. Just like that, the king becomes Pope-ish. Monasteries are dissolved. Catholic loyalists are imprisoned, and heresy is suddenly redefined by whoever has the crown on their head. You attend the coronation. Anne glides past in gold, visibly pregnant with what everyone hopes is a boy. But the baby is Elizabeth. Yes, that Elizabeth. Henry is disappointed. Anne's enemies circle. And within 3 years, the woman for whom Henry broke from Rome is accused of adultery, incest, and witchcraft. You sit in the Tower of London with the night before her execution. She prays, smokes a little. She's oddly calm. Her death, you realize, is as much a political punctuation mark as a personal tragedy. Historians still argue over how guilty or innocent she really was. Some say the charges were fabricated. Others think she played the game too well and underestimated how quickly the rules could change. Either way, she's gone. But her daughter, she'll grow up to rule for over 40 years, and the English Church, it's not going back, ever. You step into a quiet Anglican chapel centuries later. The candlelight flickers. The architecture is Catholic, but the rituals are different, a hybrid born of lust, politics, and very inconvenient theology. You smile quietly to yourself. Sometimes the most dangerous heretics are the ones who fall in love. You're trudging across the Andes with freezing toes and a belly full of coca leaves. It's 1532, and you're accompanying Francisco Pizarro. Not by choice, but because history won't wait for a better ride. The air is thin, the mountains high, and the empire you're approaching, absolutely massive. You're about to witness the collision of two worlds, the Catholic conquistadors and the mighty God-kissed Inca Empire. And somewhere in that clash, someone's going to get called a heretic. Spoiler, it's not the people bringing the Bibles. Let's set the stage. The Inca Empire is unlike anything you've seen. Roads stretch farther than Roman highways, all carved by hand and maintained with mind-boggling efficiency. You stand in Cusco, the capital, where temples are covered in gold so bright you have to squint. Religion is everywhere. Sun worship is central. The Inca believe their emperor, Atahualpa, is the literal son of the sun. And you, an awkward time traveler in colonial boots, are about to watch that divine image crumble under the weight of steel and scripture. Enter Pizarro, not exactly noble, barely literate, But he's determined. He comes bearing a Bible, a small army, and an enormous superiority complex. You watch as he meets Atahualpa in Cajamarca. There's a Bible, a translator, a request to convert. Atahualpa is confused. He tosses the book aside. Bad move. The Spaniards attack. You duck behind a pillar as horses charge, guns fire, and swords flash. Within hours, thousands of Inca are dead. Atahualpa is captured, not by a superior army but by a combination of audacity, germs, and shock. Now comes the heresy part. Pizarro demands ransom. Atahualpa agrees, offering to fill a room with gold, and he does. But once the gold arrives, they kill him anyway. You're there the night before his execution. A priest leans close, urging him to convert. If he agrees, he'll be strangled instead of burned, because burning is too heretical for a baptized man. So Atahualpa converts. They strangle him. The Spanish call it justice. The Inca call it betrayal. You call it complicated. Historians still argue whether Atahualpa understood what he was agreeing to, whether he saw conversion as salvation, or just a way to die with a little more dignity. Either way, his death marks the unraveling of the empire. You follow the story to its quieter chapters. Inca children sent to Christian schools, sacred idols hidden behind altars, old rituals whispered in Quichua after Mass. Syncretism becomes survival. You sit at a modern Andean festival. Drums pound, dancers swirl in costumes that mix Catholic saints with Inca gods. There's a statue of the Virgin Mary, but she's wearing the colors of Pachamama, the earth goddess. Heresy, or heritage, maybe both. You're in 17th century Edo, now Tokyo, and you've just been handed a curious little pamphlet in Latin. Bold move, because just owning this could get you killed. The city is orderly, the cherry blossoms are blooming, but beneath the surface there's a quiet war going on. Tonight, you're stepping into the strange, brave, and ultimately doomed world of Japan's hidden Christians, the Kakure Kirishiten. You walk the narrow back streets past samurai patrols, careful not to look suspicious. A small knock on a paper screen door lets you into a quiet home where 10 people sit on tatami mats. A candle flickers. The host says nothing. Then, in perfect Japanese, they begin to recite the Lord's Prayer. You're witnessing a secret mass. Let's rewind. Christianity first arrived in Japan with the Jesuits, especially the iconic Francis Xavier in the mid-1500s. At first, the novelty of Western knowledge, medicine, and clocks helped spread the message. Even some daimias converted. For a while, churches thrived. You visit one. Its steeple awkwardly fused with Japanese temple architecture. But things changed fast. You're present in 1614, when Tokugawa Ieyasu issues the Christian expulsion edict. Foreign missionaries, deported or executed. Japanese converts, ordered to renounce their faith, and if they don't, well, that's where it gets uncomfortable. You watch a scene that has haunted historians ever since the Fumiya ritual. A government official lays out an image of Christ or the Virgin Mary. You're ordered to step on it, proving you're not a Christian. The image is worn smooth from thousands of fearful feet. Some comply, others hesitate. You meet those who refuse. They are arrested, imprisoned. Some are tortured in chillingly quiet ways. Upside down in pits, water dripped on the forehead for days, bodies slowly broken not with violence but with time. But others high. You follow one family as they carry their rosary beads carved to resemble Buddhist prayer items. Their crucifix, it looks like a household ornament. Their prayers, muted, whispered, passed down orally in distorted Portuguese, Japanese hybrids no priest would recognize. Yet they persist. For over 250 years, long after Christianity was legally erased, these Kakure Kirishiten maintain their rituals in secret, without churches, priests, or sacraments. Just stories, relics, and fierce memory. When Japan reopens in the 19th century, foreign missionaries return, and are stunned to find entire villages that still identify as Christian, but barely resemble the Catholicism they remember. Historians still debate it. Were the hidden Christians faithful or heretical? Their theology had drifted. Their rites were unorthodox, but their commitment, unbreakable. You light a small candle in a hidden chapel on Nagasaki's coast. The stone walls echo with both silence and song. You realize, sometimes heresy isn't rebellion. Sometimes it's survival. You're sitting under a dusty parasol in Cairo, sipping something sweet and minty, watching the donkeys pass by. The sun is relentless, but you're not here for the weather. You're here for one of the most fascinating footnotes in history. A Muslim philosopher who was tried for heresy by both Muslims and Christians. Tonight, you walk in the sandals of Averroes, or as the locals called him, Ibn Rushd, a man who thought too much for his own good. It's the 12th century. Cordoba, in Muslim-ruled Spain, is a city of poetry, libraries, and very heated philosophical arguments. You're perched in a marble courtyard with birds chirping in the lemon trees as Ibn Rushd lectures about Aristotle. Yes, that Aristotle. While Europe is still cautiously poking at Latin translations of classical texts, the Muslim world, especially Al-Andalus, is knee-deep in the stuff, and Ibn Rushd, he's knee-deep and neck-deep. He's writing commentaries, challenging interpretations, and, most controversially, arguing that reason and religion don't have to fight. You nod along until he drops the spicy take it. If revelation and reason seem to contradict each other, maybe we're just interpreting revelation incorrectly. Q record scratch. In Sia Redoba, this is not a crowd pleaser. Theologians call him arrogant. Conservatives call him dangerous. Some even call him an agent of Greek paganism smuggled in under a turban. You follow him to Marrakech, where he serves as a court physician for the Almohad Caliphate. Things go smoothly, until the political winds shift. The ruling caliph, once a patron of philosophy, suddenly pivots toward strict orthodoxy. And guess who's in the crosshairs? Ibn Rushd is declared a heretic. His books are banned, his commentaries burned, and he is exiled to Lucena. You walk beside him as he leaves the city gates, head high but heart quietly broken. Here's the twist. While he's being silenced in the Muslim world, his ideas are smuggling themselves into Christian Europe. Latin translations of his commentaries on Aristotle make their way into universities. Thomas Aquinas reads him. Scholasticism is reshaped by him. In fact, so many European philosophers get excited by Averroes that the church invents a label, Averroism, and then declares that heretical too. So now he's banned in 2 religions. You sit in a medieval lecture hall in Paris, centuries later, as professors whisper about the commentator, not daring to say his name too loudly. The very logic that got him exiled now fuels an intellectual revolution. Historians still argue whether Averroes was a devout Muslim misunderstood or a rationalist sneakily undermining religious dogma. The truth? Probably a bit of both. You look at the stars, remembering how he once tried to reconcile Aristotle with the Quran, logic with faith, philosophy with the divine. Not everyone wants those worlds to meet, but you're glad he tried. You find yourself wandering through the painted streets of Florence, where everything smells like fresh bread, wet stone, and just a little bit of oil paint. It's the late 1400s and the Renaissance is in full swing. Art, science, philosophy, and some truly dramatic spiritual crisis. Tonight, you're walking beside Girolamo Savonarola, a man who took one look at the Renaissance and said, "No thanks." At first, he's just another monk. Quiet, intense, with a stare that could probably set fire to parchment. But then something clicks. He starts preaching, loudly. His sermons shake the walls of San Marco. You sit in the back pew, stunned as he rails against vanity, corruption, and, most scandalously, the Pope himself. Yes, you heard that right. He calls out Pope Alexander V, one of the Borgia popes, accusing him of moral decay and political rot. People gasp. You sip your wine very quietly. Florence, tired of political chaos and the extravagant Medici, actually listens. In 1494, the Medici are overthrown, and who do you think steps in to help shape the new republic? He declares Florence a New Jerusalem. No more balls, no more cosmetics, no more secular books. Art deemed immoral is burned. You stand in the crowd as boys patrol the streets, demanding citizens throw perfumes, mirrors, and even musical instruments into a towering fire. The infamous bonfire of the vanities. It's mesmerizing. And a little terrifying. Savonarola has created a theocracy in the heart of the Renaissance. While Botticelli is allegedly tossing his own paintings into the flames, the rest of Europe is watching in confused horror. Here's where it gets messy. You're there when the tide starts to turn. People miss their parties. Artists grumble. And Rome, oh, Rome is not happy. The Pope excommunicates Savonarola in 1497. The next year, Florence rises against him. You walk beside him as he's arrested, tortured, and forced to confess to, well, being too intense. Maybe heretical. Maybe just unpopular. He's hanged and burned in the Piazza della Signoria. Right where his bonfires once roared, the square goes quiet. The historians still argue with Savonarola, a reformer ahead of his time, a religious extremist, a political opportunist. Some call him a precursor to Protestantism. Others just call him a party pooper with divine ambitions. You sit on the steps as the city returns to its art, its laughter, and its light. The Renaissance didn't stop, but for a brief moment, it paused, gasped, and stared into the fire with Savonarola. Not all heretics were burned for disbelief. Some, like him, burned for believing too much. You're trudging through a soggy English field in the early 1500s, your shoes filled with mud and your head filled with questions. The Reformation is just getting started on the continent, but here in England, it's a slow boil. And you're about to meet the woman who stirred the pot with quiet fury. Anne Askew, you first spot her in London, walking briskly, dressed plainly but with purpose. She's not a noble rebel, not a warrior, not even a nun. She's a poet, a reader, and, most dangerously, a woman with opinions. Anne is part of a well-educated gentry family. She's smart, will read, and deeply drawn to the Protestant ideas filtering in from Europe. But here's the thing. Henry Vico may have broken from Rome, but he hasn't exactly thrown open the gates to reform. England's theology is still Catholic-ish, and the laws still pretty Catholic and harsh. You sit with Anne as she copies passages from Tyndale's English Bible, which is technically illegal. She reads about grace, about faith over works, and about communion not being literal flesh and blood. She's not loud about it. Not yet. But in a society that expects women to smile and nod, even quiet conviction is dangerous, then she writes. Not just private journals, but theological arguments, letters, and even verse. Her words are measured, elegant, and deeply challenging to the Church's teachings. You get the feeling she knows exactly what she's risking. In 1545, she's arrested for heresy. You watch as she's interrogated, first gently, then not so gently. They want names, especially of powerful women in court who might share her views. Anne. She gives them nothing. She even corrects their theology mid-interrogation, which is bold. They torture her, unusually, horrifically, on the rack. You're in the room, holding your breath as her body is stretched until her joints separate. She survives but cannot walk afterward. They carry her to her execution on a chair. In 1546, Anne Askew is burned at the stake at Smithfield. She's 25. You stand in the silent crowd watching the flames rise. She doesn't scream. Her final words are lost to the wind. Historians still debate it. Was Anne a martyr, a radical, a pawn in political games? Her writings survive, rare for women of her time, and her voice echoes with quiet defiance across the centuries. You close the little booklet of her poetry, wondering how many others like her vanished without a trace. Sometimes heresy isn't loud. Sometimes it's soft, clear, and unstoppable. You're sitting beneath a blooming cherry tree in Kyoto, sipping bitter green tea that warms your hands in the cool spring air. The year is 1637, and while the petals drift lazily around you, something explosive is about to happen. You're about to witness one of the least talked about uprisings in world history, led by teenage heretics no less. Welcome to the Shimabara Rebellion. Your sandals crunch on the gravel paths as you make your way through a Japan that's closing itself off from the world. Christianity, once cautiously allowed by the Tokugawa shogunate, is now banned outright. Missionaries have been expelled, converts are hunted, and yet there are whispers in the wind, hymns sung quietly in the rice paddies, and strange little crosses carved into rocks. Shimabara is a rural region, home to impoverished peasants and disgruntled samurai, many of them secretly Christian. You share rice and salted fish with a group of farmers who are taxed beyond reason. The local daimyo is brutal, demanding silver, silk, and crops even during famine. Then a boy appears. His name is Amakusa Shirdu. He's 15, and he claims to be the heavenly messenger, a divine leader, a Christian prophet. Depending on whom you ask, he's either a saint or a charismatic cult leader with great hair. You follow him as he leads 37,000 rebels, peasants, Renin, and devout Christians, into Hara Castle. They barricade themselves inside, praying, singing hymns, and preparing for battle. The shogunate sends troops. Then more. The siege lasts months. Winter sets in. You huddle beside a fire as supplies dwindle. Still the rebels believe. Shiro has seen visions. God will deliver them. He doesn't. In April 1638, the castle falls. The rebels, men, women, and children, are slaughtered. You walk among the silent fields afterward, stunned by the scale of the violence. Over 35,000 dead. Shirdo's head is displayed on a pike in Nagasaki as a warning. Historians still argue about the rebellion. Was it religious? Political? A tax revolt with a messianic twist? The Tokugawa government decides not to take any more chances. Japan enters full Sakaku, the policy of national isolation. Christianity is completely eradicated, driven underground for over 2 centuries. And Shirdo, to some a deluded boy with delusions of grandeur, to others a tragic symbol of faith and resistance. You pause in a quiet shrine. There's no cross here, but if you know where to look, sometimes you'll find little carvings, tiny Marys, dressed like Buddhist goddesses, hidden heresies quietly blooming like cherry blossoms in spring. You're weaving your way through the narrow streets of 17th century Amsterdam, the scent of fresh bread and herring mingling in the fog. Here, in this bustling port of tolerance and trade, the world seems a little less rigid, until you realize that even in this liberal corner of Europe, heresy still has a price. Tonight you're shadowing Baruch Spinoza, a man whose thoughts are so revolutionary, so quietly explosive, that the religious authorities of every stripe wanted him gone. Spinoza isn't flamboyant. He doesn't preach in the town square or challenge kings to theological duels. You find him hunched over a workbench, polishing lenses for microscopes and telescopes, his hair a bit unkempt, his fingers stained with ink and glass dust. He's Jewish, but not Jewish enough, according to his community's leaders. Raised in Amsterdam's Portuguese, Jewish community, many of them refugees from the Inquisition, young Spinoza starts asking uncomfortable questions. You listen as he muses over the nature of God, the soul, and free will. He's influenced by Descartes, but he goes further, way further. To Spinoza, God isn't a person. God is nature, everything, the universe itself. You sip your ale and blink. That's heresy, not just to Jews but to Christians too. In 1656, when he's only 23, the rabbis issue a cherem, a total excommunication. You stand in the back of the synagogue as they read the edict. Spinoza is cursed, forever banned. His name is not to be spoken. He becomes a ghost among the living. And yet, he keeps writing. You read early drafts of his Ethics, a book written like geometry. Axioms, theorems, proofs, about the nature of reality. It's dense, profound, and radical. He believes that everything is interconnected. That freedom comes not from divine command, but from understanding necessity. He doesn't care about fame. In fact, when he's offered a professorship, on the condition he stop criticizing religion, he politely declines. Spinoza dies young, at 44, likely from inhaling too much glass dust. But his ideas, they live on quietly, subversively. They inspire Enlightenment thinkers, secular Democrats, atheists, and even modern scientists. Historians still puzzle over him. Some say he was the first secular philosopher. Others insist he was deeply spiritual, just in a way no one understood. Einstein once said he believed in Spinoza's God. Whatever that means, you sit under a crooked Amsterdam tree, listening to the rain, thinking about a man who dared to whisper the universe into a new shape. Some heretics are loud, some are flames, and some, like Spinoza, are lenses, shaping light quietly. You're standing in the sweltering sun of 18th century Calcutta, India, brushing sweat from your brow with a scrap of linen. All around you, the city teems with life. Rickshaws creak along narrow alleys, British officers bark orders in clipped tones, and Hindu priests chant under banyan trees. But you're following a woman moving through it all like a quiet ripple in turbulent water. Raja Ram Mohan Roy's fiercest supporter and one of colonial India's first female reformers. Unsung, unnamed by most history books, yet pivotal in a quiet heresy of a different, challenging caste, custom, and colonialism with words instead of weapons. She doesn't wear armor. She wears a cotton sari, tucked neatly, feet bare. You sit with her at dusk as she copies out Sanskrit verses by oil lamp. Scripture she's not supposed to read, let alone interpret. Women, especially Brahmin women, are expected to be devout but silent. She's neither. She reads the Upanishads and argues. She questions the morality of sati, widow burning, when a woman, barely 14, is immolated on her husband's pyre in the next village. You can still smell the smoke the next morning. She writes anonymous essays. She helps run underground schools for girls. She meets with Christian missionaries, not because she wants to convert, but to debate them. She believes in universal truth, that all religions share something, and no one owns the divine. And then she connects with Raja Ram Mohan Roy. You're in the back of the room as they speak in Bengali English, a patchwork of defiance. Together they push for laws banning sati, for women's literacy, for printing the Vedas in vernacular languages so the poor can read them. Radicals, reformers, heretics to both East and West. The British East India Company watches warily. The Hindu orthodoxy burns effigies of them. She gets no titles, no statues, but she keeps teaching, keeps writing. Even as her name is forgotten, historians still struggle to track her real identity. Was she Roy's sister? A student? A student? Some say she didn't exist at all, but the letters are real. The schools, the essays, the ghost of a woman who dared to say, why, when silence was expected. You wander the streets of modern Kolkata. It's loud, messy, and brilliant. Somewhere a statue of Roy stands proud, but nearby, in a quiet alley, a plaque has been chipped away, once bearing her name. Her heresy wasn't against God, it was against invisibility, and that perhaps is the hardest fire to endure. You're trudging through the sharp winds of 19th century Utah, your boots sinking into patches of snow and red dust. A prairie dog scampers past. Overhead, storm clouds gather like angry preachers. You're heading toward a settlement where the rules are different, where faith has a frontier accent, where heresy wears a beard and builds temples. Welcome to Mormon country. You meet Joseph Smith first, but just briefly. He's already been shot in jail by the time your journey truly begins. The real tension lies in the man who takes over, Brigham Young, the Lion of the Lord. The man who leads thousands across deserts to establish a new Zion. You share cornbread and beans with settlers under canvas tents. They speak of visions, angels, and golden plates, of persecution back east, of finding peace in the wilderness. But you notice something odd. This isn't just a church. It's a nation-building project, with its own currency, its own militia, and yes, its own prophets. Then comes the big heresy, plural marriage. You attend a sermon in Salt Lake City, seated next to a woman who's wife number 4 out of 8. She seems fine with it. She offers you tea as herbal, of course, and casually explains how each wife has her own room, her own chores, her own place in a celestial plan. You're still chewing on that idea when she adds, well, it's better than starving in Missouri. Back east, everyone is horrified. The U.S. government calls it barbaric. Newspapers run cartoons of lecherous Mormon elders. But to many in the church, plural marriage is a divine commandment, not a social experiment. And resisting it is resisting God. You watch as the heresy grows into a movement, and the movement grows into a state of mind. Then the feds get involved. Anti-polygamy laws, arrests, underground churches. You follow young men across frozen plains, dodging marshals and court summons. Some are jailed, others go into hiding. Eventually, in 1890, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints officially renounces polygamy. Publicly, at least. Secretly, it's complicated. As you sit on a hillside above Salt Lake, temple spires catching the last light, you reflect on how heresy sometimes becomes orthodoxy, until it doesn't. Historians are still divided. Was early Mormonism a utopian experiment? A cult? A brilliant adaptation to frontier pressures? Some see Brigham Young as a theocrat, others as a pragmatic pioneer. And plural marriage? Well, let's just say family trees in Utah are ambitious. You light a small campfire. The sky is wide and quiet. In the land of heretics, heaven sometimes comes with a footnote. You're in Paris now, but not the Paris of postcards and baguettes. It's the 1920s and the city hums with something electric. Smoke, jazz, scandal. The Great War is over, and the old world has cracked open like a soft-boiled egg. Tonight, you're sitting at a cafe table next to Andrew Breton, who's explaining, between sips of absinthe and long, dramatic pauses, that logic is dead and reason is a trap. Welcome to the world of surrealism. At first glance, this doesn't seem like heresy. It's art, right? Just some melted clocks and guys painting eyeballs where noses should be. But then you see it, the deeper rebellion, not against the church this time, but against reality itself. You tag along to a poetry reading where no one actually reads poetry. Instead, they chant in nonsense syllables and throw feathers in the air. Someone brings in a cow. No one explains the cow. No one needs to. Breton, the unofficial pope of surrealism, talks about dreams as truth, randomness as freedom. He says that the waking mind is a prison built by governments, religion, and capitalism, and that true thought comes only when you stop trying to make sense. It's weird and strangely liberating. But heresy, oh yes. Because they're not just painting strange things. They're declaring war on Western rationalism. They're rejecting centuries of Enlightenment thinking, denouncing science, mocking politics. They write manifestos like others write scripture, except theirs often end with don't. Whatever. You sit beside a young Salvador Dal, who insists the mustache is part of the philosophy. He paints a lobster on a telephone and dares you to say it's not real. You hesitate. Meanwhile, the authorities are nervous. Governments see them as subversive. The church is confused. And academics are fuming. Breton even excommunicates fellow surrealists who don't follow the rules of non-rules. You see the irony, right? A heresy that becomes a doctrine with its own schisms, prophets, and sacred cows, and sometimes literal cows. Historians still debate surrealism's meaning. Was it political protest, emotional therapy, artistic madness, or just a group of sleep-deprived poets making mischief? You stroll the streets of Montmartre. Somewhere someone is painting a fish that's also a priest, that's also your subconscious. You smile. Maybe heresy isn't always a fire. Sometimes it's a dream you refuse to wake from. The fire is out now. You're lying still, somewhere between wakefulness and dreams, the last echoes of surrealist chants and desert winds drifting quietly into nothing. You've traveled far tonight, from candle-lit courts of heretic kings to jungle temples, forgotten valleys, and smoky salons where strange ideas danced across the walls like shadows. And now it's quiet. Maybe you're wondering what any of it means. Maybe you're just glad to rest. But if there's one thing to carry with you into sleep, it's this: history isn't just battles and treaties. It's full of whispers. Of people who stepped sideways when everyone else marched straight. Of minds who dared to ask, what if? And hearts who paid the price for not staying silent. They weren't always right. Often they were just different, and maybe that's what makes them unforgettable. So close your eyes now. The lights are low, the world outside can wait, and the story has run its course. You're safe here in the gentle quiet after the storm. Sleep well, traveler.